Greatest. Sweet. Sour. So good to taste.
Welcome to Great Taste on KRUU 100.1 FM, the solar-powered voice of Fairfield, Iowa. I'm Steve Bosch, your host every week for 60 minutes of delicious radio, and once every month, the first Tuesday of every month, we're at Green Building Supply, where we produce a live show, thanks to Jason Strong of Fairfield Media Center. So, Jason, thank you as always for all your help. And we are about ready to get into some... What can people see? Can they see all of these things right now? Can they? They can see cookies and cake. And is that cake? Cake and a crepe. Bagels. Can they see bagels or not? They can see bagels, right? And of course, the radio audience can't see any of this, so they have to use their imagination. But I'm certain that there are very powerful intellectuals out there listening to this, because I'm sure that's the only demographic we have. So it'll work out just fine. Anyway, as you can imagine or see, we are going to be talking about grains. And with me is Dean Goodale, who is the proprietor of Run of the Mill Organics. I love that name, by the way.
Thank you.
And also Eric Rusch, who is the guiding light, or maybe that's Denise, actually, the guiding force, we'll say, behind Breadtopia. Hi. At breadtopia.com, where you can find just about everything that you ever wanted to know about grains. And I'm hoping that we're all going to have the opportunity to learn a lot about what I would like to call the real story of grain during this next 60 minutes, because I think there's just a lot of strange stuff that's been going around over the last few years about grains, from the crazy book Against the Grain. I mean, hello? Didn't we all learn in school that civilization was built on grain? And now maybe that's just something that was propaganda, but I think that most civilizations were built on grain. And just the bad rap that grain has been taking, deservedly so for some grains, or what used to be grains, let's put it that way, and undeservedly so for just an amazing array of products that are quite full of flavor and nutrition. So why don't we just get into that, and maybe you could give us just a little overview of the history of grains.
Well, let me just back up and give you a little background, the history of how I got into this real quick. So we had some...
Is that as old as the history of grains?
Not quite. I hope not, because I was involved in this one. I don't think I'm several thousand years old anyway. So we actually put the mill in our former dairy barn. And the dairy barn had an issue with electricity called stray voltage. And it was... it really wreaked havoc with that. So we had an empty building that we'd spent a lot of money on renovating, and I was thinking for a couple of years what to do with the building. And so I finally figured that for the benefit of the farm, for the benefit of biodiversity on our farm, better rotations, doing something with rotations that could actually generate some money for the farm, we came up with the idea for the mill. So I like the idea for all the reasons, because it benefited the farm. Like I said, it created diversity. As an organic farmer, you do corn, beans, and then you struggle with the third crop. Now I've got, barley, oats, rye, wheat. There's that. Now I don't know which crop to choose from. It's like flipped for me. Which is wonderful, because you just don't see any biodiversity like that on any farm, and in my farm it's going to look like that now. So that's nice. I started looking into wheat and what wheat was, and it really was quite a journey, realizing what's happened with wheat over the last, especially 100 years. I mean, there's all the breeding and things that's gone on, but also the processing, and we can get into that more later. But I don't know much we want to talk about that now, but I guess that's a go ahead. But the main thing I want to talk about with the history of wheat is the processing. maybe Eric can talk about the genetics a little bit if you'd like. But about 100 years ago, we switched from stone mills to what's called roller mills. A stone mill is just what you think it is. It's two stones, and it grinds the wheat down, and it makes a flour out of it. And there were different technologies for sifting out bran, and that's pretty much what we ate. So it had the endosperm, it had the germ, and it had a little bit of bran left in it. When the roller mills came along, they're capable of separating all three of those components of the wheat into different channels, and they do that immediately. As soon as it's broken down, they go into separate channels. And the only thing that we really eat and process in non-organic, conventional, standard flour is just the endosperm. It's the cheap, simple starches, and the body reacts to it like it does refined sugar, basically. So if, you're talking about diabetes, you're talking about heart disease, you're talking about a whole array of health concerns that come out of this, but also you've pretty much stripped all the nutrition out of it. So about 100 years ago, right at the time these roller mills came online, outbreaks of beriberi, pellagra, rickets, and there was an epidemic of these things, primarily because we took our main food source, our main grain, our main carbohydrate source, and we stripped it of nutrition, and then we fed people that. So that's where now the USDA, FDA, they require these flours to be fortified, because if you don't, you're pretty much going to die. But of course we know that sprinkling vitamin dust onto flour isn't going to absorb into the body the way that the natural balance of nutrients in real flour is going to impact the body and absorption of those grains. So we've taken to the point where no longer the flour that most people consume won't make you sick or give you these diseases that broke out when we come into roller mills, but it's not really anywhere near the point of a healthy food.
Did you read the sign when you came in here that said "Turn off your phone"? It's unbelievable.
Well, didn't tell me to turn off your phone.
Right, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that the host can't read the sign. But anyway, thank you, Dean. Keep going. Thanks.
Well, that's good. I think we can leave it there for now.
Okay. All right. So I don't know whether you want to talk. Do you want to talk about the genetics?
As long as you can promise me that no one listening has any kind of science background.
Well, let's see. I'd have to go back on what I said earlier about our audience and its demographics, but I don't think so. I don't think anybody does.
Yeah, right. Well, actually, I have very limited knowledge of the genetics of wheat. Other than it's pretty widely known that some of the older varieties of wheat, and especially einkorn, is the one that gets quoted the most frequently, has just half the chromosomes of modern wheat. And Dean just informed me this evening that actually all wheat, is it all wheats have a different chromosome count?
Most modern wheats have the same number, but if you go back in time, some of the older wheats have different chromosomal counts, yeah.
Right. So I think for sure einkorn, emmer is another one that's close second to einkorn in its ancientness. So, and I think as you roll back the clock, you probably find grains that are maybe more where the nutrients are more readily available to people. They just haven't been hybridized a lot.
Now, is it true that we have in use generally over the world maybe 4 cultivars of wheat, and that's it?
I don't know that.
Maybe Dean does.
There's a good number of wheats, primarily because you have winter wheat, you have spring wheat, you have hard wheats, you have soft wheats, you have white wheats, you have hard whites, you have soft whites, you have, so there's quite a number of, there is some genetic diversity in the wheat. It's not as bad as pigs or something.
So in terms of the cultivation of commercial wheat crops, there is still a lot of diversification, because I was under the impression that it was very minute.
Since I'm not a conventional 2,000-acre grain farmer in Montana or something, I really don't know how much diversity is out there. But based on the catalogs that I see and the organic options out there, there seems to be multiple varieties. I haven't seen a...
Okay, so I think we better get off this topic, because none of us know what we're talking about, so it's perfect. So the bottom line is that the commercial wheat, whatever its variety, that many people happen to be consuming, doesn't have any real inherent vitamin or mineral density to it, other than what's been added by the FDA because of how it's milled.
Well, be careful. Don't say wheat. Wheat's and again, we don't want to pick on wheat too much. I read something Galen sent me earlier today, and people were discussing the problems with wheat and how so many people can't digest wheat now. And rather than blaming the wheat, we should be asking the question, what's happened to our digestive system so that we can't process the wheat anymore? So that's another.
I thought that we were focusing in terms of the discussion that the real problem exists because of how the processing takes place. So that's what I'm curious. I want to make sure we get to the root of the matter here, and certainly what you're talking about in terms of the digestive system is true, but it could be that also. I mean, it's like, is the tail wagging the dog, or what's going on here? Because of the way the processing has evolved over the last 100 years, you've told us that we're basically ingesting nothing that's good for us.
Well, it fills you up, but yeah, I mean that is true. But when you said the wheat, so be careful not to say wheat, and so what you're talking about is the standard all-purpose wheat flour, the white wheat flour. So the wheat's.
I don't want to disparage wheat. Okay, I'm not doing it. But there are varieties that are milled today that do still, depending upon how they're milled, contain a large amount of nutrients, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think pretty much any whole grain wheat. The way I look at this is I put most of the blame, so to speak, on the way the products are made now, the way bread is baked for speed and shipping, and a number of reasons that degrade the quality of and the availability of the nutrients in the food they're using. So I think that ideally if you could use an older grain, that'd be great. But I think even a modern grain that's prepared properly, and I can get into that if you want, would be a whole lot better for you than anything that's sort of processed the way it typically is today.
Okay, so just to clarify for our listeners, when they go to the grocery store and they see, because I think that this is an important distinction to draw, whole wheat bread, whole grain bread, whole grain this and that, do they have to be a little bit leery? Do they have to understand a little bit more clearly what that actually means when we're talking about whole grain in the generic sense that it's used in the grocery industry, or as you're using it? Because I think we're talking about two different things, and a consumer has to understand.
Well, let me address the whole grain issue. Again, going back to the roller mills, and again, remember the three streams are separated initially. So when they make a whole wheat flour, they separate the three streams, and then and people have asked these questions, and nobody knows. They keep it secret. It's proprietary. They add back some or all of the bran and maybe none of the germ, and that's the whole wheat flour. And that's what, and the FDA and the USDA is completely fine with them labeling like that. So that's one thing to look out for. I don't know if Eric has another comment on that.
No, that's my understanding as well. It's amazing how unregulated it is. You can get away with calling whole grain, whole wheat.
All right, and when you refer to whole grain or whole wheat, what are you particularly, how would you define that?
Well, easily, and that's taking the wheat berry off the plant, running it through a mill, just like a stone mill, where 100% of the product comes through, and that's what you consume at one time. It's separating it and reconstituting it. That's what I think of as whole grain, whole wheat.
But it's not that simple. So I mean, again, the whole.
Now the miller is going to talk.
The wheat thing is it's so convoluted and strange. So there was an actual court case brought by a miller that because he wanted to distinguish his real stone ground flour from what else is out on the market, because people were calling everything stone ground and never touched the stone. So, but the USDA actually made the decision that the U.S. public was I'll paraphrase it, was too stupid to know the difference between what a stone mill flour really was. They basically said that there's nothing to determine that the people would know the difference anyway. What it means doesn't mean that term doesn't mean anything to the public, and that's where it is. So today, if you have a roller mill, you run your stuff, you do everything I talked about, the craziness, and it never comes near a mill. There's not a stone mill in the factory. You can stamp stone ground flour on that bag.
Okay, so let's talk about what it means when you do it. So run-of-the-mill organics uses a stone ground mill. Why do you feel that that's important, and why does a consumer need to know that is important for their own health?
Yeah, North Carolina pink granite stones, made here in the United States of America. So yeah, it's exactly what Eric was saying. So you're taking the grain, you got all the nutrition there. See, a lot of the nutrition is in the germ, but the germ again, the germ is oils, and it contains the fat, and if you store it above your stove and let it sit there for 6 months, it will go rancid. So the benefit and the reason that we went this way, again, is for the industrialization of our food supply, and we wanted to be able to make stuff and have it store or ship or bag or sit on a truck for 3 months, whatever. So, there is that. So if you should use this stuff within 3 months. If you put it in the refrigerator, you could probably use it within 6 months. But we're taking that whole grain and we're milling it. So it has all three components in it. It has the endosperm, it has the germ, and it has the bran. Then it comes out of there, and then it goes into a sifter. So in my opinion, whole grain flours are a little hardier than a lot of people want. And they also don't perform as well. So if you sift it, just sift it. You're not taking out the germ. You're taking out some or as much as 80% of the bran. And so that process is actually called bolting the flour. So if you've ever heard of the term or wondered what it is, bolted flour, that's what it is. It's just a flour that's had some of the bran sifted out. And there's different degrees of bolting. You can have a really fine sieve on it, or you can have a coarser sieve on it. The coarser sieve is going to be probably a little more nutrient dense, and it's going to have more of the bran in it, which is also one of the nutrient carriers. So that's what it is. It has all the germ, it has all the endosperm, and some, or depending on which one of the products it is, which fineness of sieve it is, 30 to 15 to 40% of the bran left in the flour. So it's so the nutrients are all there basically. But if you sift the bran out, you have all that nutrients. It actually has a wonderful flavor too. I mean, white flour doesn't. People will talk about how great the flour tastes. It tastes like nothing. One of the things I brought tonight was these crepes. A simple crepe batter is just the flour, eggs, and milk. So the reason I brought that and I cut it up in little squares is that you can actually taste the difference of the flour. So you'll actually taste, and this is just a hard red winter wheat. It's an organic hard red winter wheat, and it's got the germ and the endosperm in it, and a little bit of bran. And you'll taste it's a little bit sweet, it's a little bit nutty. It has a rich flavor to it. But that's all. And again, it's a very plain thing. This is not like some of these cakes or something. But the point of that is that you can actually taste the flour. So have a taste of that, and you should notice the difference.
Okay, so the advantages to locally milling are you get the grain while it's fresh. Another advantage is that you are actually growing some of those grains locally too, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So right now we just planted it's one of the reasons I was running a little late today, but we actually got our spring wheat in this morning and this afternoon, and we also have a crop of hard red winter wheat that's 4 or 6 inches tall now also.
So all those things are advantages to having a local milling operation. But in addition to that, go ahead.
Well, we also talked about, you do have the oils here, you do have the germ, and again, that's the fats, oils, that's where most of the nutrition is going to be held. But so yes, when we mill, if we're selling to Eric for Breadtopia or something, he'll send me an order, we'll mill it and get it to him that same day usually, the next day at the latest. And we do that also for anyone else who's buying flour from us. They'll make an order. I have an order for Des Moines, 150 pounds of bolted flour. I'm going to mill it the day before I take it up to him. So he's got this product that's super fresh. And again, it can go rancid over time. So you want to get this stuff fresh as you can and use it right away. So that's something we can do. If you're milling this in a central mill and it's going into giant warehouses, I don't know how efficient your shipping is. Whatever goes to a store, it's probably going to be it could be 2 or 3 months before you buy it off the shelf, and that's something you don't want to do.
Now you're also milling other grains than what you grow too, right?
Yeah, I mean our farm. We're organic. We're actually working at biodynamic certification now. We try to incorporate as much knowledge as I've learned about farm chemistry. The mineral balance in the soil. We try to keep that at optimum levels, and we also do as much as we can with biology. I've taken courses and helped teach courses with Elaine Ingham and the whole soil food web, and keeping the counts and the diversity of the biological life up. So we integrate all that, and I think we were capable of producing a pretty high quality wheat, but we can't necessarily grow all the wheat we want. There's types of wheat that grow better in Canada. We're a little bit wet here in southeast Iowa, and wheat's like a drier climate. So it's a little bit of a challenge. But when we do have to buy, we try to find, we're only doing organic. It's Run-of-the-Mill Organics is the name of the company. And we are trying to find other growers to have, high standards as well when we do purchase, yeah.
You're listening to Great Taste on KRUU 100.1 FM, the solar-powered voice of Fairfield, Iowa. I'm Steve Boss, your host every week for 60 minutes of delicious radio on KRUU. Dean Goodale from Run-of-the-Mill Organics is with us, and Eric Rusch from Breadtopia.com is with us, and we're talking about grains. And I hope, how many of you actually noticed the taste of that wheat when you chewed that crepe? Let me see. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it was different experience, right? I mean, you're not going to make, Dean would be a fool, right, to have made a crepe with regular white flour and brought it in and say, hey, why don't you chew this up and see how it tastes? Because, yeah, that's not going to work. So let's talk a little bit about the differences in baking when it comes to using whole grains. And the first thing I want to mention is that a lot of people feel like, I think a lot of people who aren't used to eating really great whole grain breads think that they're going to probably have something that's really dense and heavy and chewy and not really satisfying.
Yeah. The one thing I would qualify what Dean said a moment ago was the breads made with the whole grain flours maybe not performing as well. Of course, it's only performing as well if you've grown up on Wonder Bread. Then it's not going to perform the same. But it's when you start incorporating more and more whole grains in your diet, what we're finding in our household is that white flours has less and less of a role, and it's hard to go back. It really is a pretty insipid and tasteless substance, and certainly has no nutritional value to speak of, except for providing some carbohydrates. Along with that comes the high glycemic index and all that. But one way that to transition into a healthier diet without going through withdrawals of not having your morning white baguette, for example, is to go to this bolted route, where you're sifting out some of the bran, and it's the bran which creates the density in whole grain bread more than anything. And so if you can actually, you can buy it bolted, or you can actually buy whole grain and sift it out yourself, and then you have the bran yourself to make your bran muffins. Or what we do is when we're making, I've done this before anyway, you want a lighter pizza crust, for example. You don't necessarily want to use 100% whole grain flour, but if you sift out some of the bran, you'll get a much lighter crust, and then cut this pizza sauce with some of the bran. So you're getting all the nutritional value and thickening your sauce a little bit. There's ways of incorporating the bran back into your diet, because there's incredible nutritional value to the bran, not only for digestive benefits, but for your whole what is it called? Your gut.
The bacteria in the gut.
Yeah, right. That's kind of what thrives on the bran. So a lot of what we're doing now is with the bolted flours, which Dean is on the verge of having available at everybody's in his own packaging, and so that you should start looking for that here locally soon.
And what should consumers look for in other areas, or when they go to a store, whether it's a natural food store or whether it's Whole Foods or something? Is there a certain kind of commercial product that's available that they can find that is like what you guys are doing?
Not very much. I think if there was, we wouldn't sell as much as we do online. I mean, it's surprising to me that how much we ship. Considering that shipping is often as much as the product itself. And it's because people can't find high quality grains, even just the whole grains, and certainly not the bolted flours. And you can easily buy a sifter and do it yourself, but people are busy and don't have time to do all that stuff. We also have these mixes, which we're like this cake and those Madeleine shaped cakes, and the cookies are all from Breadtopia mixes.
And what's that?
That's Dean brought that in. That's bolted flour also. And I challenge anyone, if you blindfold tested all of these, you wouldn't think, oh my gosh, this is great for healthy bread. You wouldn't have to qualify it, healthy products. My wife.
Here comes the light. The light is coming in.
I'm rambling, and I'm probably missing half of what.
I just wanted to say that the mixes are actually made with whole grain. They are not bolted.
None of them?
Mixes and the cookie mixes are not.
Well, thank you for that clarification. I really appreciate that. Now, I want to go back, though, because I want to say that if you were blindfolded and you tasted this chocolate chip cookie, you would know immediately that there was something that was very different about that than most chocolate chip cookies that you eat. And I absolutely found it was delicious because it was satisfying on a multitude of layers. It wasn't just like, oh, I need a sugar rush. It was like, wow, it's got great texture. It's delicious. You can really taste the depth to it. All those things are part of the eating and tasting experience, I think, of using whole grains. I mean, we're going to get into these bagels in just a couple of minutes. Those are awesome bagels. Those are great. And I know there's some white flour still in them, but I'm very curious to know how much, and we'll get there.
Those are the training bagels.
Training for personal fitness, or you're training in making them?
Just for weaning off of, it's a transition bagel from all white to whole grain. They have all the textural and enjoyment value of a white flour bagel, and they're about 55-60% bolted grains, so they've got a lot of germ in them and some bran. And sorry about screwing up on the mixes. Yeah,
they're only your product. It's no big deal.
Well, Denise and Galen formulated the mixes, and I can't get. And
you know what? You can't do everything. It's not a problem. We're going to forgive you. And what I want to do, we'll let you recover for just a minute here. So tell us a little bit about the grains in terms of, you talked about bolted, all right? You've talked about the whole grain, and now something that's gotten really more and more fashionable, I guess, recently is sprouted grains. What's that?
Well, there's a process that we use. We soak the seeds, and we actually immerse them in water, and then we have a second phase where they're drained, but they remain moist. And we wait for them to sprout. They actually put out little roots, but we don't. It doesn't go to the point where it starts putting out roots and then putting out a sprout like right before you juice it or something, like wheatgrass juice or something. It just starts the process of germination. But what that does, it allows it allows a lot of things to start happening. I mean, it starts to transform from grain to a vegetable, a grass. and a lot of things change. One of the main things is that there are enzyme inhibitors in the seed, and those start to completely break down, and that's one of the things that does inhibit digestion of wheat are these enzyme inhibitors that are in the seed. So regular flour, not sprouted flour, has a tendency to suppress some of the enzymatic activity going on in your digestive system. So the sprouted flour that's a primary reason it's more easily assimilable. Also, the nutrient absorption. This is a little bit more controversial, and there's different people saying different things, and there's a lack of real scientific evidence and study. But there are certain amounts of nutrients that are enhanced, and the absorption is certainly greater in nutritionally as well. So it's not just that you digest it better, but there's actually it's more nutrient dense as well.
How you feeling?
Fine.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about the difference in baking? I mean, is a baker somebody who's used to baking with, we'll say cake mixes? It was very difficult for me to say that, but cake mixes, because I actually saw a recipe today in Saveur magazine in the current issue. It was this layer cake, and the person I couldn't believe this, but they actually used a layer cake mix out of a box in Saveur magazine. I'm like, what the, but see, here's the thing about people may not realize this in the dining world, in the fine dining world, in the restaurant world. There are many personalities who run restaurants that are really only concerned with look and flavor. They're not really concerned at all about what the component pieces are that are going into that. So that's why you would find in a high-class cooking magazine this recipe that uses a cake mix, because it accomplishes what they want to accomplish. There's multiple layers that can be done very quickly. And so that was kind of a digression, but the bottom line to all that is, what's the difference between a baker who is used to using all of these commercially available products and now wants to transition into developing their skills in a more holistic manner with whole grains?
So what's entailed in making the transition?
Is it a lot? Is the process vastly different?
Well, there's nothing complex or complicated about these mixes here. There's plenty of this cake to go around, so you'll all have a chance, that people that are sitting here, to try these out, and I think you'll be amazed that I think they're kind of like the holy grail of baked goods, because we're not sacrificing anything as far as nutrition goes, but I think the taste experience is as good as anything that anybody could come up with.
But if somebody wants to actually
do it themselves,
right?
No, how hard would it be? I mean, it's just you take you start with the flour, and it's in this case, we have the cookies are made with red fife, and the cake mix is spelt right. Have I got that part right?
She's saying it's right, and you know what? As you're doing that, this is really great, because I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about, tell us about some of the other grains. So while you're talking about this, integrate that information in there, because that's really good, because I don't think that most of us have what? Red fife. What is he talking about?
Yeah, these are heirloom grains. Red fife is grown primarily, I think, almost exclusively in Canada now. Although I was just talking via email our supplier in Canada, and he's got a grower going in now in North Dakota, and another one starting up in Montana. So he's working with some grain growers in the Great Plains area, and I think there's some in Montana going on too, to get the red fife grown in the United States. It was brought over to this continent in the 1800s by a guy named David Fife, and it was the grain it was pretty much just their default grain for a long time.
Where?
In Canada. At the same time, we were growing a lot of this stuff called Turkey Red, and that's the ancestor of modern red wheat, pretty much. and so we have a lot. We carry a lot of that. That's primarily what we do, is focus on the heirloom grains.
Now, were these wheats, were they indigenous to North America, or did they come from somewhere else?
No, I think, did any of these grains not come from the Fertile Crescent at one time?
They're not known to be grown here first. Definitely, yeah, they came from Eurasia.
Yeah. So, but anyway, getting back to your original question, these are just the freshly milled grains, and with some butter in the case of the cookies, and vanilla, and we use organic cocoa for the and organic vanilla too, by the way, and organic cocoa for the chocolate and the vanilla cake. And egg, you add your own eggs. That's the only thing, and some salt. But that's it. I mean, if you just had the recipe, you could duplicate this yourself easily enough.
What are the secrets to learning how to use these different flours? Because don't they all have different properties?
Well, now you're talking about the baked goods or breads or just anything.
Red Fife, Turkey Red, Spelt. All of these different hard red winter wheat, spring wheat, don't they all have different properties?
Most of them don't vary that much from each other. There's only a couple different grains that are, I think, challenging to work with. Einkorn for one, and I think rye is actually another, that are particularly sticky, and they absorb water differently, and they can be technically kind of challenging to handle. Which is why oftentimes when you're baking with einkorn, for example, you're cutting it into another flour. But Turkey Red, Red Fife, Spelt, I just use them interchangeably with modern red wheat. And there's going to be some slight difference in their moisture absorption, but it's not something you can adjust too easily just by feel, once you know how the dough should feel in the first place. But it handles fine, it performs fine.
You do have to watch your gluten, right? I mean, we do something that Eric calls for Breadtopia's select bread flour, and of course that bread flour specifically would be a higher gluten flour. But one interesting thing about einkorn is it actually has higher protein, and the gluten is gluten is the protein in flour, but einkorn has higher protein but less gluten.
Yeah, exactly. It's the gluten that gives bread its extensibility, and it's just that elasticity and ability for it to trap gases from fermentation, so it actually rises. So something a wheat that like einkorn that's low in gluten isn't going to rise. It's going to be denser by itself. But the Red Fife and the Turkey Red perform. They have lower gluten and yet it's high enough where it's workable, and you don't end up with a brick when you bake with it.
So is there one book that you'd love to recommend for people who want to get started doing this
with the heirloom grains? I don't know that there's much out there on heirloom grains per se. There's more and more literature available using whole grains, and Peter Reinhardt has written a book called Bread Revolution, which focuses on whole grains and also a lot on sprouted whole grains, which I've just started to bake with more and more. And interestingly enough, I find they don't perform much differently than unsprouted flours either. It's just a little bit sweeter and a whole different nutritional profile. But it's all easy enough to work with. Anybody could do this.
There is one thing to understand about gluten. Some bakers will probably know this. People that bake extensively, and probably a lot of home bakers as well. But so what I was getting into earlier is, so our bread flour is a hard red spring wheat. The spring wheat has the highest gluten, and what Eric was explaining about gluten and this relationship to rising bread. So you want a bread that's going to rise real well. You want high gluten. So that's the hard red spring. Hard red winter wheat is a relatively high gluten flour, but not as much. And then your also most of your hard wheats are higher gluten. Soft wheats are typically lower gluten. Soft white is probably one of the lower gluten wheats you can find. And then when you have an all-purpose flour, typically you'll take and different places do different things, but it's, 70-30 mix between the hard spring and a soft white, so that you get a balance, and so it's all purpose. You can bake bread with it, you can make pastries with it, but there's also things like, if you're rolling croissants, you get too much gluten in there, and it'll roll it out and it'll shrink back, so you want to use more of a all-purpose that has lower gluten all-purpose flour. See, and again, a baker, if someone wanted something like that, they could come to me and I could make a custom blend for them easily.
So you can make a custom blend that used whole grain that's going to yield a croissant that is light, airy, amazingly like the kind of croissant that we might pick up at a great Parisian boulangerie.
I can make the flour if you can make the croissant.
Let Eric make the croissant.
Yeah, I've made 100% whole grain croissants, and I think they were just incredible. And we have a couple of people in the audience who can attest to that aren't my family members.
Well, now there's the next challenge. Steve Boss is looking at Eric going, "Oh, maybe you'd like to make some of those croissants sometime, just like the bagels," which, by the way, I don't think I've mentioned are amazing. And what's great about them is that it's just what you mentioned. The texture is just what you want out of a bagel, chewy, and just the right chewiness. But the difference is that they really have a lot of flavor, because the wheat that went into it has a lot of flavor to it. So that ramps it up to another dimension. Yeah,
there's a few things going on there. I have to. Besides the wheat, which is definitely a big part of it, they're also partially sourdough leavened, and then I also use some organic instant yeast from Germany, which is the only certified commercial yeast on the market anywhere that I know of.
So most of the time, do you use sourdough preparation?
And is available at everybody's. I am a sourdough fanatic. I rarely don't use sourdough in my baking, and I have to mention, even though this is mostly about grains, well, I guess this ties in obviously. I think if you want to bring out the most in grains, then sourdough leavening is absolutely the way to go. In fact, I'm not the only one who thinks so. Everybody knows Michael Pollan, right? He has this book, Food. Well, now, is that what it's called? Cooked. Sorry. He's also, there's a Netflix 4-part documentary. Basically, it's just
called Cooked.
Wow, that's
after the book.
Amazing. Part 3 is about bread. He's a big convert to home bread baking and primarily sourdough leavening for his bread baking. And he says something that I think is pretty much the rebuttal to everything anti-gluten, and that's that he feels that if all bread was simply sourdough leaven with long fermentation, there wouldn't be nearly the negative reaction that people have with eating wheat in general.
Now, I do just want to mention that this in no way is a reflection on people who have celiac disease, which is a very serious disease, right?
Yeah. Only 1% to 2% of the population that I've read many times actually are diagnosed with celiac, but there are a number of people who have negative reaction to eating wheat for God knows how many different reasons it could be, and there's a zillion potential factors that play into that. But one way to mitigate it, I think, certainly is with long fermentation sourdough natural leavening. And again, it's not a hard thing to incorporate in. It's just a little bit of extra effort. But if you want to enjoy bread and you can't, it's a great alternative.
This is Great Taste on KRUU 100.1 FM, the solar-powered voice of Fairfield, Iowa. We come to you every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central Time and Friday at 7 a.m. Central Time on KRUU FM. And we always are bringing you 60 minutes of delicious radio. Once a month, we do it live at Green Building Supply. So if you're in the area, we'd love for you to come on by when we do this. It's the first Tuesday of every month. Anybody who has any questions, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask them. So just if you have any, think of them and come on over. And I'm going to get to you in 1 second, Dean, because I also want to ask Eric to think about this while I'm talking to Dean, and that is,
so I can ask my wife.
No, you can do that. Yeah, absolutely. But I want you to think about the different types of substitutes that people might be able to use when they're making their own mixes, because I had this experience recently where using a waffle mix. And I'm sorry it wasn't yours, but I've had your I really want to taste it tonight, so I'm looking forward to it. But it was another whole grain mix, and it calls for, I think, a little bit of oil, and it calls for milk, and my wife doesn't like milk, and so she asked me to just use water. And so I used only water, and my experience was that, wow, I tasted the grains a lot more using water as opposed to using milk. So that was a really revelatory experience for me. So I just want to talk about that in just a minute.
Yeah, so I just wanted to back things up here and give a bit of an overview and a wrap up at the same time. I want to go back.
You want to host the show?
No. This will take this. No, I really don't. Once a year or so. This is like my fourth time here. That's plenty. How long have you been doing this? About
9-10 years.
So I'm only every other year. So this was kind of a revelation for me. When I sat down to do the business plan for this, I actually did my legwork, and I went out and I talked to a couple different bakers in town, restaurants, everybody's, and I got all these commitments for the flour. It's going to be a locally, grown, locally milled flour, and everyone was very excited about it. Then I came to him with the flour, and because again, and to be honest with you, at the time I wasn't as clear as I am now, and again, some of the education we're trying to give now to people about what's going on with what bolted flour is and the differences. But the bolted flour is a slight bit darker in color. So, if you're looking for Wonder Bread, you're not going to get it. If you're looking and Eric and I fondly refer to that white flour as white death, which is appropriate as far as I'm concerned. So when I actually came out with my product, I went to the baker, and the baker's like, that's too dark. I can't get my Wonder Bread white looking bread. And then I went to the bagel shop, and they're like, that's a little too dark. We want the white. We want it to look like Wonder Bread. And then I took it to everybody's and started selling it, and they said, well, people are coming in and saying they don't like the dark color. So you have a nutritional superior. It performs amazing. It tastes better, but it's not like whole wheat. It's slightly darker. And the feedback I'm getting from everybody is they pulled my product. Okay, so I had it in the store, and they said people weren't buying it primarily because of the color, or because there's this thing also about people thinking that it has to be ultra super fine pulverized flour to be palatable or something, and that's all anyone wants is the white super pulverized flour, so it looks like baking powder, something. And so the reason I brought in the crepes and this chocolate muffin for two reasons. One, I wanted people to actually be able to taste the wheat, so you could tell that it has a superior flavor. And then the second thing, and I'm no master chef. I made those in an hour before the show started. And it's just a chocolate cake recipe I pulled off the web. And so what I want you to look at is the texture of that flour. I can use a all-purpose flour. That's actually a bolted flour. It's the grainier, more it has more bran in it. So what is?
A little dry, yeah. But it's good. Tastes good, but it's a little dry. Mm-hmm.
No, it's not. We'll let the audience. We'll let the audience.
But it's good.
But so he threw me there for that. Yeah, we'll let people. So basically, I was looking at so that goes to show you can get texture and you get the flavor. So you have it all. So I need to be educated and understand what people are trying to cook that wouldn't work for, or that, hopefully we're trying to do some education here today. And I know that there's I know how this works, because I ran a 250 person CSA in this town, and you get 5 or 6 people calling you and complaining, and it sounds like the sky's falling. And I know that there's a couple people that for some reason or other wanted their Wonder White color in whatever they were cooking, and they went back to everybody's and complained. But if everyone in this room says we want, when you go to everybody's now, because it's going to taste better, it's nutritionally superior, you're going to want the flour. You go there and say, we want this flour in here, they'll get it back in. But right now it's not available. But I will have a retail package product on the shelf that'll be allowed, that I'll come out with in the next month or so.
I'll send you a bill for that commercial time. No, really, here's the truth. You hit on it. It's education. That's all it is. It's just like anything. If you're used to something, then that's what you look for. That's what you want, because you expect that that's what you're supposed to get. So it's just like I was in the kitchen of a very fantastic Italian restaurant, Northern Italian cuisine. They don't use tomatoes hardly at all in Northern Italian cuisine. Table of 4 came in, and they walked out after looking at the menu. Why? Because there wasn't any tomato sauce on any of the pastas, because that's what they have learned through their exposure is Italian. Right, that's what Italian food is. So what you're asking people to overcome is not really anything. It's very little, but it will require some education. And the great news about that is that even though it's a little dry, tastes delicious. But it tastes delicious.
So there's a qualifier for that.
You did a great job.
Chef could have got the moisture better.
It doesn't matter. The point is, it tastes delicious. It has a great flavor to it.
It's not the flour's fault. I'm taking the blame for that one.
Okay, back to Eric. So let's talk a little bit about substitutions. Is baking? I think the one thing about everybody. Could we hear it for Dean and his?
Show of hands. How many people think it's too dry?
Come on, be honest. Thank you, Lenora. Thank you very much. Okay.
1.5. She wasn't even.
Yeah, but those people, do you know who they are? Those are good people.
Those paid, right? It's paid supporters of the program.
Look at Tom. He's still chewing. Okay, so. Baking, though, really, it isn't. It's not just like it's not like cooking. I mean, cooking is easy, but baking is. You got to be a little bit more precise, don't you?
Baking is a whole different world. I can bake bread, but when it comes to almost anything else, I'm pretty clueless. So Denise, on the other hand, fortunately, between the two of us, we've got the baking thing covered. Had Busy Bee Bakery here in town for a number of years. She knows, she's like the cookie queen and does cakes. She baked our own wedding cake. She was so.
What is this?
That's leftover wedding cake right there. No, Denise, come on up here. You wanted to say something about this. Substitutions of things?
You asked questions about how you can substitute, and most of in our mixes, you can make the substitutions. In fact, even on the label, a lot of times it'll say, you want milk, but you could substitute soy or almond milk or other things like that. And if you choose to do water, say in the pancake and waffle mix, you will need a bit of a binding agent. You can get that through eggs or an egg substitute as well. To add, and then you have like butter. Okay, people don't want to use butter. A lot of times I'll substitute coconut, especially for a sweet product. I'll substitute coconut oil instead of butter. That works really well. Then you get some flavor, but you still get the fat of the oil. So you can substitute anything in any of these recipes where you have to add the moist ingredients.
Thank you so much for that. And you can find a lot of great videos on your website on breadtopia.com, and they're instructional, and they really can lead you through all the steps needed to bake different types of products.
That's correct. And we're getting more and more into the different there's always been an emphasis on natural leavening and whole grains, but I'm really pumped about these bagels, and we've got the bagel.
I am too.
The bagel recipe and the video tutorial that goes with it going up on our website this Friday.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I want to just make sure that everybody has, the tools that they need. So we've talked about there are resources online, almost everywhere online. You can find so many different resources for baking bread. And you mentioned a book that you thought was really good. Jim Leahy has a book that I think is really good. I can't remember the title right now, but it was
My Bread.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's mostly kind of taking off of his famous launch of no-knead baking into the lexicon, and it's just a bunch of variations of the no-knead recipe. I don't think it does anything to speak of with whole grains.
No, I don't think it does either, but you can learn a lot in terms of the no-knead method, and it's great.
There's a tremendous amount of book. It's always surprising to me that what's left, Now, actually, there's books coming on that are more specific to sourdough baking, which I think is great because there's been a real lack of that available, but that's changing too.
And there's a really cool book that came out quite a few years ago called Flatbreads and Flavors. And that's one of the things that I think in terms of the bread world, we don't talk about very often. But flatbreads, there's so much variety all over the world.
Yeah, well, the popularity of flatbreads dwarfs anything else globally. In fact, tomorrow I'm shooting a video with Greg Gassaway on chapatis. So he makes incredible chapatis, and so that'll be something that will be available on our website.
Do you know what kind of flour you use?
I do. It's bolted kamut flour, which is something that I think Dean will have available too at some point.
Yeah, kamut, it makes a really nice chapati, but
it's not bolted. It's whole grain kamut.
Whole grain kamut. Okay, well, so it makes a really good chapati. But you know what also makes really great chapatis? I use 100% einkorn.
Really? That's interesting. Well, I should probably qualify for people that don't know kamut. It's really just a brand name for Khorasan wheat, which is the ancestor of modern durum wheat, and durum is often used in Indian baking.
I just didn't know if you had another commercial that you wanted to.
Of course. I was just surprised.
You have about 30 seconds.
Well, I did want to talk about his bagels. He didn't mention it, but and we're talking about these different types of wheat. What was the other one besides the bolted? This was maybe
turkey red. It could be any.
So he used the bolted turkey red in this, right? Yeah. And then you also cut it with half white flour.
Yeah.
Okay. So and what I want to just emphasize one more thing. So even 100% organic, you go to the organic bin in the bulk, it's the organic white flour. Again, that is absolutely has the germ out of it. It's not a real nutrient dense product. It's been over processed, and then they've sprinkled vitamins back in there so that it can be legally sold and won't kill you. So you really want to look for a real stone ground flour. If it's really truly stone ground, it'll have to be. It won't say bolted necessarily. And I won't put bolted on my bags and stuff or the bulk because it'll confuse people. It'll just say all-purpose stone ground.
Dean Goodale, Run-of-the-Mill Organics, thank you very much for being our guest. And also Eric Rusch, Breadtopia.com, thank you very much. Thank you, Denise and Galen, whoever baked all these magnificent things up here. I'm sure everybody's going to be excited about getting the chance to enjoy them. You've been listening to Great Taste on KRUU 100.1 FM, the solar-powered voice of Fairfield, Iowa. 60 minutes of delicious radio.
Great taste. Sweet. Sour. So good to taste.